Yes, hello, it's Jason Louv. Welcome back to the Ultra Culture podcast. We have a great episode for you. I'm talking to Angel Millar. Yes, I'm actually back to interviews. Angel is putting out a book called The Path of the Warrior Mystic, Being a Man in an Age of Chaos. You can pre-order it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or IndieBound. It's coming out in November. So if you're listening to this prior to November, hop on it and pre-order it because it looks awesome. Well, actually, it is awesome. I've read it and I've spoken to Angel quite a bit about it in this interview. So high recommendation, actually. We have a whole lot in common, as we found out in this interview, in terms of our esoteric backgrounds. He's definitely been through a lot of the same mazes, byways, and highways of occult learning as I have, and has come to some really interesting conclusions, which he has summarized in this book, which is a great book on basically how to reach for higher ideals in a world that is constantly trying to tear and drag everyone down to the lowest common denominator. And he's woven in all kinds of stuff from the world's esoteric spiritual traditions on how to raise yourself up. It's particularly aimed towards men, but I think anyone would enjoy it. But it's primarily focused on men. Here's a little bit from the press release. Ancient and classical societies have always had an ideal of manhood. In Japan, the samurai cultivated not only the art of the sword, but also poetry, calligraphy, and spiritual practice. In Confucianism, the ideal man was the chunzu, a higher man, who cultivated both the arts of war and the arts of peace. And in medieval Europe, the knight lived by the comparable code of chivalry. Such men, considered both warriors and mystics, exemplified wholeness. Yet today, men exist in a chaotic world without role models, guidance, or a sense of the sacred masculine. Exploring how to reconnect with the archetypal male ideal and develop the different sides of your being, author Angel Millar offers a journey of self-development to help cultivate yourself as a whole, mentally, physically, and spiritually. He examines some of the problems facing men in the world today: lack of strong friendships, distracting technology, constant criticism, and shares practices to develop yourself in the face of these problems. He shares techniques for enhancing your focus, overcoming fear, integrating your shadow, developing inner silence, and creating a self-image more appropriate to who you are and aspire to be. He also explores the importance of relaxing tension in your body to help you break free from pattern-induced behavior and self-defeating thoughts embedded through muscle memory. Examining influential figures, both contemporary and historical, like Steve Jobs and Swami Vivekananda, powerful myths from East and West, such as the tale of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, warrior and brotherhood traditions, as well as literature and fine art, this guide will help you discover your inner sacred masculine, a better understanding of the world and your place in it, and ultimately, how to become a confident, strong, and dynamic contemporary higher man and a leader in your own life. Well, tall order, but I think you're really going to enjoy this. I love the book, and I love this conversation. But first, I am once again asking you the most important question in the world. What is magic? Magic is power. It's the power to wake up to your true purpose in life. You know this if you've been following this podcast or my work for some time. And you also know that when I talk about magic, I'm not talking about stage magic, and I'm not talking about Hollywood magic. I'm talking about real magic. Much like we just discussed in the intro, magic is the spiritual path of becoming the person you were meant to be. It's the magic you already have in yourself that you know with the right tools you can awaken right now. And at magic.me, my school for magic, meditation, and mysticism, we give you all the tools you need to do exactly that. So, as you know, I'm an author and journalist that's spent a quarter of a century now exploring the world's spiritual technologies and combining them with the best of modern psychological research to radically awaken and transform people's lives. So, dear listener, let me ask you a question. Do you truly feel like you've discovered your purpose in life? And if so, can you truly say that you're living it? Listen, when we're out of alignment with ourselves, life loses its magic, doesn't it? Suddenly, it can feel like nothing we're doing works, like we're in a machine we don't understand, maybe even a machine that's against us. Maybe life can feel like one giant frustration or even humiliation after another, like we're stumbling around in the dark. Well, let me let you in on a little secret. That's what life is like with the lights off. So how about we turn them on? At magic.me, I've assembled the world's best tools for awakening your consciousness and turning on the lights. At the magic.me website, you can tap into thousands of video lessons on the core teachings of the world's sacred traditions in order to supercharge your life with empowerment, clarity, and magic. You can stream our courses to any device on your own schedule in bite-sized units, one by one. Seriously, even if you've got 10 minutes a day to start learning magic, you can immediately start aligning with your true purpose, gain control of your life, achieve clarity, and become the absolute best version of yourself. Because after all, that's what the world needs most of all. You at your best. Magic.me's courses are safe, effective, and potent. These methods have worked for people for thousands of years. They've worked for thousands of our happy students, and they will absolutely work for you. Our courses hold your hand and literally guide you every step of the way to achieving massive success, spiritually and materially. And of course, we offer full money-back guarantees on all of our courses. So dive in now, and if for any reason you decide this isn't for you, that's cool. You can just contact us within our terms, and we will refund 100% of your money. It's literally a no-risk proposition. So check out our courses at www.magic.me, magick.me. And whether you start with our basic subscription or dive headfirst into our massively transformative mega courses like the Adept Initiative and the Alchemy of Chaos, you can start creating your own new reality right now. All right, it's time to turn on the lights. And with that, I will see you in class at magic.me. And in the meantime, here's Angel Millar. Welcome to the podcast, Angel. How's it going?
It's going well. Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
I very much enjoyed your book. I just finished it. It's just out. So The Path of the Warrior Mystic, Being a Man in an Age of Chaos. And this is a great book. This is a book I would give to, I think, any dude, but definitely like a younger guy just coming up, who's feeling a bit lost. And I was very moved by quite a lot of it. There's so much you put in there from so many disciplines, martial arts, mysticism, positive thinking, lots of stuff that echoes my own experiences. But there's so much in there that it's just this great grab bag of kind of links to traditions or paths to becoming a more complete individual, I think. And I would not hesitate to give this to a young guy or any guy, I think.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Thank you.
So what? Tell you what. You want to start off? You want to tell us a little bit about the book?
Sure. Well, the book is really a journey of sort of self-development in a way, looking at different aspects of what we might call the initiatic path. And it references, in particular, the myth of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, as well as other mythologies. And really, it's a kind of adventure of going into the world and being uncompromising and developing oneself to the full, and not making excuses for oneself or feeling I'm hard done by because I had these things happen to me, but really kind of embracing what life throws at you and using that actually as a source of inner strength to transform oneself and one's life.
Got it. Yeah. I think that if I was to, the thing that really, this is a book that is really interesting, I think brings together a lot of things in a very cool Venn diagram. It's in some senses to me, struck me as a very much kind of like a positive thinking book, or it struck, the narrative style you use is similar to perhaps like Robert Greene, 48 Laws of Power, that type of thing, where you're using examples from the lives of successful people to demonstrate principles. But at the same
Yeah,
time, the
yeah.
people you're mentioning are like David Bowie and Bauhaus at times, which is just like awesome, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So it's kind of like I can see this book very much straddling the mainstream of perhaps positive thinking, but then bringing in
Mhm.
ideas from more initiated traditions, if you will. And so maybe if you want to talk a little bit about what your intent was, is this a book? Who are you intending this book for when you were writing it?
Yeah. So really, for any guy who wants to develop himself to the full and live life to the full, really, and develop not just the mind but the body, develop the consciousness, develop skills in the world, and develop, in a sense, a kind of mystical understanding as well as creativity as well. But I think women could read it. It just wouldn't necessarily be applicable to them in every sense. But yeah, so that was really who I was thinking of when I was doing it. And I suppose I would have to say, I'm thinking of, of what would have benefited me, throughout my own life journey. And not only that, but what lessons can I draw on in my life as well that might be of benefit to other people.
Well, there must be a lot of this book that is drawn from traditions or things that you kind of went into and experimented with
Mm-hmm.
yourself in your own life as well, from martial arts to other pursuits, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and when I was writing, I did have to kind of reflect on my own life quite a lot, and things I had forgotten about as well. But certainly, I begin with a discussion of the warrior, martial arts, and in a way, I try to embody what is a very uh, uh, classical way of being for men in really in every developed culture or civilization. That is developing these dual aspects of manhood. And as individuals, we're very conflicted and contradictory. We want all kinds of different things, and our own desires and fears change throughout the day anyway, as we all know. Or we get what we want and we suddenly don't want it. And that's a kind of very low level individual, whereas the warrior aspect really develops both sides of what we would think of as classical masculinity. So it develops the warrior side through the arts of war, martial arts, spear, sword, and so on, but also the warrior, whether it's in Christian chivalry or Islamic futawa, which actually is translated chivalry, but is actually the literal translation is actually young manhood, would develop skills that are maybe poetry, arts, calligraphy, and so on. And Miyamoto Musashi, the samurai, was renowned in Japan for his calligraphy and his painting, even for his landscape gardening, which we would never think of. And in the West, you have a figure such as Egil Skallagrimsson, the extremely feared, in a way, psychotic Viking warrior. I think he made his first kill when he was 15, maybe even earlier. But he was also renowned for his poetry, and he actually introduced end rhyme to, I guess you would say, European poetry. Whereas before, it was actually the first word of each line that would be the rhyming word. So, the warrior is this, it's not a contradictory figure. It's actually the figure who is trying to resolve this duality that is in existence itself. And so I begin with a discussion of the warrior, of the body, of the mind and the body in competition. But I actually end with the mystic. And I take the mystic, the term from Arnold Toynbee, although, of course, it very much relates to what interests you and I. But Toynbee uses the term mystic to mean, on the one hand, like a mystic who receives this revelation and that he retreats from the world, receives the revelation and goes back into the world and transforms society through his sort of initiated vision or revelation. But on the other hand, he also means the creator who sort of sees beyond what is accepted in society and comes with this new vision of society as well. So it begins with the warrior but ends with the creator, which would be more like the artist, the calligrapher, the musician, and so on. So we want to draw these two things together to not only transform ourselves, but to have an impression on the world that is healthy and conducive to the good life for other people as well.
Yeah, that really struck me about this book because it is, clearly coming from a more, if you will, initiated perspective. I think
Mm,
that there has obviously been such a push towards a balancing push. I think, I'm interpreting this through
mm,
after just having read your book. So this is how I'm thinking about it. But
mm,
there has obviously been a push back against feminization in a way in our culture. I'm
mm.
thinking of the kind of like the massive demand for the Joe Rogans and Jordan Petersons of the world, and the need to be like
Right,
this
yeah.
kind of hyper macho figure, but almost in reaction against the perceived
Hmm.
softness of modern life. But what you're saying
Yeah.
here, although it might be perhaps seen as to some extent in dialogue with that, what you're saying here is not necessarily that. It's to meld those two things together, perhaps, the warrior and the mystic.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, a couple of things. Yeah. So, this isn't a book where it's about men. It's a book about the classical ideal of men, which would be, samurai such as Miyamoto Musashi. It would be the Islamic warrior with Futawa, the Christian knight with chivalry. Okay. I'm not saying that they were always perfect or good ideals, but this idea of the fusion of the masculine sort of warrior ethos, war, self-defense, physical strength with the more what we would consider feminine arts, poetry, music, creativity, and a sense of beauty. And with this as well, being able to enter into different states of consciousness, we become fetishizing of rationalism today. We're not really rational creatures at all. There's all kinds
I
of
agree.
we go through all kinds of states of consciousness throughout the day, from daydreaming to hypnopompia when we wake up to sleep and so on. But in regard to, let's say, the Joe Rogans and Jordan Petersons, and I know people will condemn them. I listen to them. I listen to a lot of
Mhm.
other people who will be contradicting that. But the point I make about society in my book is that our society is actually quite extreme, and it goes from one extreme to the other. And that's another reason for developing this dual aspects, because sure, today, the way our society is, it wasn't 30 years ago, and it won't be 30 years from now. It's constantly shifting one way and another. It's a very unstable but very creative society. But ultimately, the only way to navigate this is to develop oneself as a whole, and not specifically the people you have mentioned, but there are, of course, other people in this sort of like men's
Mhm.
uh, world who sort of present themselves, I'm a warrior, but actually, that there's other sides to them that they won't acknowledge because they're afraid, oh, there are other people who think I'm feminine, but they're usually highly artistic and this kind of thing as well. So, our society is extreme and is always going one way than another. And we don't want to be carried along with that current. We want to be a fully developed human being who can resist these extremes. And I quote P.D. Uspensky in the book, who was a disciple of the mystic Gurdjieff, and he says because people think they have self-consciousness when they don't, they will never develop self-consciousness because they don't see any reason to. And this book is, in a sense, about developing that self-consciousness, knowing when things have gone out of balance. And I do say again, for example, when tradition is attacked, you might need to defend it, but when innovation and creativity is attacked, you'll need to defend that as well, because what society needs is the best of the tradition, which can be an example, but it can also be something you attack to create new things. Picasso attacked the tradition of fine art, but there was a tradition to attack to create something new and interesting. And when everything becomes kind of like we can do anything, you don't get interesting art or interesting music or interesting ideas anymore. And I think that's the danger for our society today, or one of them anyway.
Yeah, the as I was kind of grappling with the ideas in your book, and thinking of a way to encapsulate it in my mind for this interview, the thing that really stuck out to me is, I mean, it seems to me that if I was, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if I was to kind of underline kind of the core meaning perhaps of your book, it's that of aiming for a transcendent ideal, and
Yeah.
of rejecting that back and forth movement, of rejecting the critical criticizing mentality of society, and in a sense that transcendent ideal is, as you've just been talking about, is in a sense at least more unchanging because it's tradition, but it also could be the future. And I think you even touch on this in terms of people attacking new innovators and things like that. If I could read a passage from your book that really, I mean, I underlined several of them that I'll probably pull out because they just struck me. This is early on in the book, and I think you're talking about the relentless critical and tearing down nature of our current discourse, which I think we're all uncomfortable with. And you say, nevertheless, siege morality, as you call it, which is a great phrase, siege morality, has real world consequences. It is used as a weapon against those whom the moralist disagrees with or feels threatened by, and against those who act in accordance with their will, since the moralist feels incapable of doing likewise. At its most pathological, siege morality becomes a kind of compulsive game in which ever more microscopic faults are detected and the most innocent action or statement is held up as an example of heresy. But more than that, it locks the moralizer out of the realm of being. It always focuses, and I think that's the key point, it always focuses him on others and what they're doing. It is as if the modern human being has imprisoned himself. I love this. It is as if the modern human being has imprisoned himself in a glass box of his own making, and he recognizes that only those outside the glass prison are truly capable of acting, capable of good and evil, capable of becoming themselves. Unable to bear the sight of it, he bangs on the walls, shouting and trying to get others to stop what they are doing. In a single explosive moment, the walls are torn down and the glass is shattered. I mean, what better way could you encapsulate our the poisonous online discourse these days?
And to an extent, we can't really blame those people because the algorithms are designed to make people angry, they're designed to make people hooked, and it's really bringing the worst out of people. And I don't know if you know this, I probably mentioned it in my book, but over the last 4 decades, creativity has gone down. It's been measured by this quote unquote Torrance test, and it's called CQ, or creative quotient. And it's actually gone down in the last 4 decades. And I don't think we actually need for it to be measured to see that, because certainly, 40 years ago we had, or more or less, punk, grunge, all these different subcultures. And if you were a teenager, maybe in your early 20s, 3 decades ago, you were going to be like, maybe not making your clothes, but like changing them in some way, sewing patches on them, ripping them, and doing kind of crazy things to them, and making your own kind of fashion. You'd probably try and be in a band or something like that, or doing art. But now young people, as with everyone else, are getting sucked into this being online all the time, where they cannot develop themselves, and where instead they're given this identity of, okay, well, you may not be in a band or you may not be doing anything creative, but you're a victim and that's your identity. And this is extremely dangerous for them. And I reject this kind of a simulacra of rebellion. It's not real rebellion, and it keeps people plugged into the system. And all of this rebellion usually is around, well, tune in to our news broadcast tomorrow to see the latest horror or whatever it is. And so it keeps people plugged into the system. It's not a real rebellion at all. To be truly rebellious, in a sense, you have to go through something to think through it and go beyond it. And then, as Zen masters would tell you, once you've mastered one art, you can see relationships to other arts. So in classical Japan, it would be, you see the relationship between the sword or kendo or sword fighting and the brush. These two very often went together. This Bunbu Ryodo. That's probably not a great pronunciation, but the art of war and the art of literature, the brush and the sword. And again, there's a relationship to the tea ceremony and so on. And that's the way you can think truly original thoughts, because it doesn't come easy. In fact, I would say, I don't know if I mentioned in this book, I think I might, that in a way, we can only have, there are different kinds of thoughts, and there are thoughts that come and go. There are thoughts that we pursue for a few months, and there are thoughts that we pursue for about a decade or more, and then our life can be considered a thought. And you have to go through it, and it's a long, long process. But at the end of it, you start to think original things, but you don't for a long time. So,
would you say that? And this is not a loaded question, although I don't know how I can phrase it otherwise, but that by rebelling, that if you truly rebel, not like what you're talking about, but if you truly, or what you're criticizing, but if you truly rebel, perhaps eventually you are attracted to a more not necessarily a more traditionalist path, but I'm thinking of like Colin Wilson's The Outsider, where he very much makes the point that people may begin attempting to get away from or reinvent their culture, but then often become devotees of a tradition, right?
Yeah.
And find something more eternal that's perhaps outside of their daily cultural discourse.
Yeah, and clearly that's an option that some people are taking up. I was listening to an interview with a convert to Christian orthodoxy on the Hermetics podcast today. So clearly some people are doing that. For me personally, and I would say that's not necessarily the case, and that's not really what I'm advocating. In a sense, I'm sort of saying that let's say we take the metaphor of the artist, or someone who wants to be an artist. Many people want to be a type of artist. They may say that they want to be a cubist artist, for example, but I would say you don't want to be a cubist artist. You want to go through that tradition, or through a good education of art, and then come out the other side where you can express yourself fully. And maybe there will be some kind of relationship to that, probably not. But in a sense, it is about taking the risk of going into the chaos, going into the world, going through some kind of tradition, not to embody it or stick with it or say, this is, I'm this, I'm that, and I'm not those other things, but to go through it, to discover yourself in that journey, and then to come out the other side where you can say, I see that the weaknesses in this tradition, and here's where I'm going to innovate and do something new. If it's true, in the words of Khalil Gibran, I paraphrase slightly, but if what I have said is true, another will come and say it with a different voice. If it is true, then your innovation will still reflect something archaic or classical or timeless. And so I don't think you need to join a tradition, but you need to go through one. And that's a process usually of several years. But I think, even if we look, you mentioned Bauhaus earlier, Goth got its name from the hollow sound that was reminiscent of cathedrals, for example. So you can't really escape the archetypal or the archaic. It always remanifests in these new things. I think where you don't find that is when it starts to become a kind of copy. So
yeah,
the punk bands today, for example, of the popular ones, I don't know what they embody.
Well, that I think the search for Instagram followers probably, but thank you for clarifying that. There's another quote actually this is one of the ones that stuck out to me the most, but clarifying the need to go through, perhaps instead of tradition, because that's a fairly loaded word, particularly these days, the process of initiation, right? Of becoming more yourself, not becoming bound by a tradition, but using a traditional form to become who you are. So this quote, but this quote stuck out to me so much. When a man has begun to be ashamed of his ancestors, the end has come, Swami Vivekananda remarked. Yet in the West, where the past is relentlessly attacked, there is hardly a people today who have not been made to feel shame at their predecessors, and few respect or revere the generations past. Yet whether we like them or not, our ancestors are in our bodies. We inherit their physical conditions, their advantages and disadvantages, their strengths, and in some case, their illnesses. The contemporary Western world is in a state of rebellion against the past. Education criticizes the thinkers, writers, and artists of the past who are deemed at best out of date. Citizens, too, criticize and even condemn the country they were born into and live in, which, for whatever reasons, they refuse to leave, and they criticize their own families. It strikes me, even just reading this now, would you consider this, this perhaps Qur'an-zonic mentality, this, constant tearing down and criticizing that so much embodies the nature of the internet, as a rejection of initiation, as a fear of basically participating in life?
Yeah, it's definitely an anti-initiatic attitude, very definitely. Yeah, and not just from the fact that initiations come from some kind of initiatic tradition, not just that, but I think if you're not willing to see the good and the positive in things, there's just no possibility of any kind of transcendence. And it's not to say that you have to think that everything is good, of course not. That's why you go through the tradition and reject it at the end and develop something yourself. But yeah, if you cannot see the potential, the possibilities, the good in things, you're in trouble. Many years ago, I studied under a Polish artist, and he was classically trained, but you would never know that from his art. Which was very influenced by Zen Buddhism, a very, very modern. But he had a real classical training from Poland. And one day he said to me, the artist can never be bored because there's always something interesting. And it's probably the case that an artist can be bored, but of course what he meant was you should always see what's interesting and good and possible, no matter, even if you only have enough money for charcoal, there's something you can draw and be interested in. And that's essential for any kind of self-transcendence. That's really the most basic element, I would think.
Yeah, I agree with you. Particularly now, I mean, we live in a society where people have more tools. The internet information technology has given people the tools to do literally anything they want, even if it takes them a while, but it won't take them as long as it would have 30 years ago, whatever it is, whether it's doing music or art or starting a business or whatever it happens to be. And yet everyone's miserable and sniping at each other all day long.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
you say just a few pages after that last quote, where you are calling people to a more heroic attitude to life, which is what most of this book is doing. This is beautiful. You say, you don't have to do this for the sake of anyone else, but only for your own sake, which is I wish people would realize. Who is more likely to live the kind of life he wants? An individual who is full of resentment, or an individual who is curious, interested, and engaged, and who focuses on what brings him joy and gives him meaning? And who is more likely to be able to contribute positively to society and to the world today? Criticism infests the West. One side criticizes the past, tradition, and achievement, and the other side criticizes the critics. They have embodied, to borrow a phrase from Hegel, the negative of the negative.
Yeah, that's right. That's kind of unfortunate because, although people may construe that we're talking about one political side, they're both attacking each other. Okay, one side is a critic and the other side is a critic of the critic. But what good is that? You need to create something, and you need to create something of meaning and value and beauty, something that enhances life.
Yeah, and it's exhausting. The constant strophe and antistrophe of modern society.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you talk about, maybe if we can bring it down to earth just a little bit, you talk so much about the process of self-overcoming and the hero's journey, and and I don't even want to say necessarily the hero's journey, because that brings up very cliched Hollywood ideas, but the alchemical journey, shall we say, because you're very much talking about layers of transcendence here. What is, maybe you can talk about your own path. Obviously, you can't help but infer from this book that you've clearly overcome many difficulties in your own life and have gone to these sources for inspiration in doing so. Maybe if you want to talk a bit about your own path through struggling with these ideas and how it related to your life.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I've lived a fairly colorful life, but Yeah, so I have to say, as I mentioned earlier, I was reflecting on even on my childhood as I was writing, and remembering things I had completely forgotten actually. And but anyway, to kind of skip that, unless you want to go into it,
No, please do.
I yeah, well, so the most relevant thing would be in regard to overcoming struggles, and obviously, I think it's true to say that I'm known as an author, and and it completely slipped my mind. I've not thought about it in decades, but I remembered actually that when I was probably around 9 years old, I was actually had to have remedial reading lessons, which I had to read out loud in front of the class to the teacher, which was, a horrible, humiliating experience. And, again, I completely forgot about it. I'm pretty sure I was dyslexic. I don't fit the criteria now, but I think I would have done, and probably even a couple of decades ago. But I was extremely talented at art. And it's really the thing that I struggle with most, that I've become most known for and most innovative in. And that's actually something that I found when I was looking at different innovators in the world, that they almost always were propelled forward by their own struggles. Or and Malcolm Gladwell claims that really success is a case of when and where you are born, largely. But as I point out, all of the people who are innovators, or most of them anyway, um, they had all kinds of struggles and disadvantages that should have made them failures. And it was those struggles that propelled them to success. And so you have someone like, Alphonse, Edvard Munch, who painted The Scream, who said, suffered with depression and illness, deaths in the family. It's terrible. But, and he said that that was his rudder in life, and that without it, he would have being, directionless. Or you take Steve Jobs, college dropout who studied calligraphy under a Trappist monk. I mean, if most young women had taken him home to meet their parents, the parents would have said, look, this guy's a loser, and you want to get someone with a good job in Silicon Valley, maybe, or whatever was there at the time. But it was precisely the fact that he studied calligraphy that enabled him to introduce different fonts to the computer, because they were all basically calculator fonts before then. So it was this disadvantage that was his advantage. It's your struggles, your disadvantage, that always turns out to be your advantage later on. But going forward in time, because childhood is not that fascinating. But
I mean, Proust would disagree with you. I mean, we struggle. It lasts our whole life. Really, we struggle with it our whole life, trying to deal with what happens for those first 10 years.
Yeah, no, that's true, and that was something that was a theme in my own mind coming up as I wrote this book. But to get to things that would interest your audience more, I became very interested in spirituality and the occult. Initially, when I was around 15, but I really wasn't. I didn't know anything. I just bought a couple of books and tried astral projection. But when I was 17, I came across a shop, an occult shop near where I lived, a few miles away, and I became very involved with it. I was there every day, and they had, had a kind of neo-pagan circle. And then later on, I don't know if we want to go into this. When I was 19, I joined the Illuminates of Thanatos. Extremely, extremely intense time, and we spoke a little bit about it off air. But actually, the reason, or one of the main reasons why I quit, I had a very intense life even outside of that. And it was a very intense time in Britain anyway, with the Iraq-Kuwait war, a real air of paranoia in the general populace anyway. But my life was very intense, very transient. I was always staying in different places. I'd stayed on a friend's couch, or lived on a friend's couch for 5 months, not long before that. And then one day I woke up in the morning. I was, cleaning myself up in the bathroom, and I spat into the sink, but all this blood came out, and the sink was covered in blood a minute later. And okay, it's not like going to war and losing a leg or something, but at 20 years old, that was quite a shock, and aesthetically it was a shock. And and at that moment, I decided to completely change my life. And within a year, I quit the IoT. I quit my job. I worked on a portfolio. Got into Chelsea College of Art and Design, which was one of the best in England. I had long hair all the way down my back. I still think of myself as a sort of long hair bohemian in some ways, but I shaved it off. I changed where I was living. I was literally, within a year, I was pretty much a different person, really, to all intents and purposes, which is a very chaos magic thing to do, of
Absolutely. I've done it
course.
many times. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But, and when I look back at that now, and I think a lot of people would look back and say, oh man, that must be horrible. And I think to myself, well, thank goodness, because that changed my life and propelled me into all kinds of different life scenarios that I would never have had. And, now a few decades later, and I've been in America for a couple of decades, I've lived in Canada as well. I'm now in New York, but this would have been unthinkable for someone from my family or background, and yet it wasn't the good fortune that pushed me towards this. If anything, I think good fortune would have held me back. And I've known people who had good luck early on, and they really are now stuck.
Yeah.
Whereas I had terrible fortune, and it's been great for me. Thanks.
That Lou Reed song, "Men of Good Fortune."
I don't. I probably recognize it.
Men of Good Fortune often can't do anything. It's from his Berlin album in the early 70s. While Men of Poor Beginnings often can do anything because, Lou Reed always rhymes the same word with the same word.
Well, you've got nothing to lose, right? So.
Absolutely. And that's such a critical experience. I've been pushed to that many times. I think that it's weird. It's perhaps harder now because our whole lives are cataloged for the whole world on Google. If we're in the public,
that's right.
It's not impossible. And sometimes, but I don't think that, life has a way of pushing people on the path into that situation. I think. I don't know if it's necessarily just you decide to do it one day.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do want to, just circling back real briefly, I do want to, I very much appreciated your call out of Malcolm Gladwell, because I do think he's a bit of a pernicious influence on society. You mentioned he's saying, you can only be a successful baseball player if you're born in August or something like this, because that's when the draft is. It's like, it's just ridiculous. And his idea of, it takes 10,000 hours to get good at anything is just so mechanistic and completely ignores the facts of young geniuses or people who have moments of inspiration, and it takes away the self-agency and it just quantifies it into this. It just feels defeatist. And yes, I mean, the push to mastering your craft, absolutely. But I feel that that meme, that's a bit of a pernicious meme that you put out there, the 10,000 hours idea, because it just sucks the joy out of everything.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Yeah. And, I think, I mean, he's obviously highly intelligent and he has many good things to say and many interesting things to think about. But this push to sort of see ourselves as we're just sort of like victims of circumstance, and okay, we can work hard and that'll make a difference, but really it's sort of out of our hands. And he himself is someone I would think should not have made it. I believe he grew up in Canada, and he's of a mixed race parentage, I believe. I mean, I would think by his own definition that is not necessarily fortuitous, would not put you on the fast track for becoming a New York Times best-selling author, and yet it's exactly what happened to. So I would say that proves my thesis.
Absolutely.
But and I think that the problem is we're being told today that well, if you have some disadvantage, if you had some tragedy in your past, you need to hang on to that and really identify with it. And I would say no, you need to realize that's your fuel to project you into the future and make the kind of changes in your life that you think are unthinkable, but that will really, really benefit you.
That's such a core, such a critical idea. Absolutely. And just history proves this attitude wrong. I mean, it's it's from, it's like the thing in the Bible, I'm the cornerstone the builder has rejected. It's always, which is a very, I mean, occult people always, it's very prove it true in a way where it's like, it's always the most, well, even just looking at history, it's like from Christ to Hitler, it's the people who were just total nobodies that changed everything,
Right.
So
Right, absolutely.
unexpectedly,
Yeah.
nobody could have predicted and
Yeah.
just came out of just
Yeah.
poverty and destitution, but they had the burning will to do good or evil.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, well, you touch on so many initiatory traditions in this
Mm.
book, whether
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
martial arts schools or
Hmm.
uh, Islamic mysticism and things like this. Do you want to talk about maybe
Hmm.
some of the, if you want to, some of the schools that you yourself have been through, and what maybe the ones that have been most
Sure.
formative to you?
Hmm. Yeah, sure. So, as I mentioned, I began as sort of initiated into neo-paganism. It's sort of like a, Wicca-ish, I would say. And then when I was 19, I joined the Illuminates of Thanatos, which I think your viewers will know is a chaos magic
Yes.
order. A very intense time, has to be said, when I joined. I joined the London Temple. There was only one at that time. And later on, I became involved with Nampai Chuan, Shaolin Kung Fu in London. And, I had brief experiences with, Buddhism or Hinduism. But really, I would say um, uh, probably in major influences after that, I joined Freemasonry in New York a couple of decades ago, which has been a transformative experience, not least of all, really opening me up to what is the background for many of these other orders, such as the Golden Dawn or the Ordo Templi Orientis. And you really get a very different sense of history when you join Freemasonry or really
Absolutely.
understand it.
Yeah, I had the same experience.
Mm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's been a great experience, and I would say, fortunately, it's now much more open to the esoteric, to the mystical, even to a little bit to the occult these days. So I feel a little bit more open about that. But other things that I have joined, without mentioning any names, I have been asked to join others are very ceremonial, ritualistic orders, and have typically not stuck around. And uh, recently or the last few years, I was kind of asking myself why that would be, because they're quite, in a sense, similar to Freemasonry. So why not? And I would say that it really reminded me of what did interest me when I was in the sort of neo-pagan scene or in the Illuminates of Thanatos. And both of those groups really influenced gnosis or trance, the mind, altered states of consciousness. Before I joined some of these other ritualistic uh, orders, I was kind of expecting there to be more of that. And I kind of felt like, well, if there isn't that, I'm already doing that by myself anyway. I'm a qualified hypnotist as well. So altered states of consciousness is something I'm very focused on, and to not experience that
Yeah.
was a kind of let down.
I
But
had pretty
other than
much the
that,
exact same experience going through
oh really?
the occult
Yeah,
rat race. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Good. I'm glad it's not me
No, no,
because
no,
yeah,
no.
it
I think we
didn't
have
appeal to me.
actually a shocking amount in common. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because we didn't actually know this, but yeah, so
Hmm.
yeah, interesting. That's good to know because I felt like I'm the only one, so that's good to
No,
know.
definitely
But
not.
yeah.
I think that, um, but then again, going into other things, you see, there's always the
Mm.
temptation with the ones that are a bit more sober to see if you can bring that trance focus to them and kind of go
Right,
even further,
right,
perhaps.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I'm very focused on that, but I'm not really intent on bringing it to other orders. I found them, to be honest, very rigid, and there's often kind of an ego component to the leadership structure, which makes that difficult. And you don't have to
Mm.
join an order to know that. You can kind of get that online, listening to people as well. So,
Yeah, the internet
but
has
yeah,
changed a lot. Do you know the
it
book
has.
"The Reign of Quantity and the Sign of the Times" by Ganon?
But yeah, I do, and I don't know if I've read all of it, but I've certainly read at least part of it. I mean, I find Gaynon's writing really hard going, but
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
uh, and I mean, he's a good kind of sounding board as the sort of the reverse or the inverse of what we see today. But I would say his limitation is that, again, he's completely against any kind of creativity as well. It's always just re-embodying what was around 1,000 years ago, if you can. And I don't think that's enough.
And I don't think you can either. I mean, as we've seen with the neo-pagan revival, it's something completely of modernity that's trying to express itself using ancient forms that probably have nothing to do with how they were practiced. But the reason I bring him up is, as just a conversational touch point in terms of, as I was thinking about reading your book, is his idea of tradition versus counter-tradition and initiation versus counter-initiation. And it's interesting going from something that I'm sure he would have considered a form of counter-initiation, like chaos magic or thelema, into something like Sufism or Freemasonry, or basically the trajectory that you're describing in your book, which is sort of more constructive, being more constructive towards a transcendent ideal, which yet at the same time can perhaps be a little bit hidebound if you don't reinvent it in your own way. So I'm just wondering if you, just from not even necessarily in the context of your book, but touching on having that kind of trajectory, which is certainly the same trajectory that I had, although I always find myself back on my own 2 feet and by myself, But if you want to, I'm not quite sure what the question is here, but that idea of tradition versus counter tradition and what you make of it at this point.
Yeah, well, I think the idea of counter-tradition is an important one because, people get involved in all kinds of things. And it's not so much even, people making up initiation rituals, because maybe there's something of value in some of them, depending on what it is or who's making them up. Because, I can say, without going into any details, my initiation into the Illuminates of Thanatos, and Peter Carroll initiated me, it really was a genuine initiation, and had some kind of archaic elements to it that I kind of appreciate. But, you even step outside the world of the occult and the esoteric. You can go to a church today and, for many years, and it's really all not about Jesus at all. It's all about, doing right in society. Or let's just take the Catholic Church. I actually used to stay in a Benedictine monastery once a year for several years in my early 20s. Benedictines are a type of Catholic monk. They wear black robes, and it's very dramatic. But, and I had an amazing experience there, and they were not trying to push Christianity on you. Maybe it wasn't mystical, but it was very contemplative, which was incredible. And then, and afterwards I thought, well, there's a friary near where I live. Maybe I should go to a friary one day and see what that's like, because they're in a way a kind of monk that swears an oath to travel around, whereas monks stay in one place. But and I went to the sermon there, and the entire sermon was about, you mustn't use condoms, and I just that is counter-initiatic if you consider a religion to be initiatic, which in some sense it is. That there's no discussion of Jesus or the teachings of Jesus. It's just this like modern thing that you shouldn't be doing, that no one's listening to anyway. There was no one there with 5 children, even 3 children. And that's a counter-initiatic experience, and and of course you can get that in the occult as well.
Absolutely.
I think
quite a lot of the occult now. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
But I mean,
absolutely.
Whether it's the the OTO or even liberal churches, you go and it's like, well, I could have got the same thing on Reddit. It's like the same kind of but I think Ganon certainly makes that point too, where it's like, even the traditions are hopelessly mired in the kind of the downward trajectory of modernity, and it's perhaps almost impossible to break out of. Even for initiatic orders are essentially caught in the current, not the 93 current or whatever, but the current of
not the cool ones,
the cool current,
the current we don't like,
the uncool kids current.
That's right. And that's the thing, they are. And unlike, say, chivalry or Islamic futawa or the samurai, well, you're learning a spirituality, martial arts, calligraphy, maybe music, philosophy, all of these different things in one. Today we have to join different types of group to get something comparable. So maybe we have to join, a martial arts school, but then we need to learn meditation somewhere else. Maybe we need to learn religion or philosophy somewhere else as well. We're definitely going to need to learn art or calligraphy or something creative and constructive somewhere else. So it's very broken apart. But if we can go through these, we will find some kind of thing that links them, and we can create a whole in our own lives, at least create something holistic for ourselves. But you probably cannot just join one tradition and think you're going to get an initiatic experience in most cases, for sure.
Yeah, it seems to be so. I think writers are always in dialogue with their time, and I think that I don't think we can totally pass over the kind of push towards traditionalism or nationalism as a current in society that certainly pre-COVID was pretty prevalent. I mean, you even mention Roger Scruton at the end of the book, the late Roger Scruton.
Right.
And you say that the forces that guide society are generally unconscious and work through the collective, and hence through superstition, widespread fear, popular opinion, mob violence, and in places where the populace is uneducated and does not know how to think, but is only capable of absorbing opinions, through democracy itself. In many cases around the world, nation states have been able to retard and, to some extent, to reverse the pull of modernity by readopting and adapting their old worldview. Shia Islam in Iran, Confucianism mixed with capitalism in China, Hinduism or Hindutva, this is actually a new word for me, in India, and Orthodox Christianity in Russia. Thus, they can hold at bay one worldview with another that is less malleable and historically and psychologically deeper rooted, even if it is opposed by a great many in these societies. Religion isn't the only weapon, however. A critic of brutalist-style modern architecture, the philosopher Roger Scruton, remarked that no one would object if cities were built in the style of the city of Bath. And that, of course, is true. With roots going back all the way back to 60 BCE, Bath is almost certainly Britain's most beautiful city. But reconstructing such cities is not suitable for a country with over 65 million people or a world with 8 billion people. We cannot endlessly replicate the past. So this is, I think, the one passage in the book that most struck me as kind of in pointing towards I think it's particularly because you mentioned Scruton and Russian orthodoxy, the kind of push towards traditionalism. And you mentioned it I think for the first time at the nation state level. And certainly this is the geopolitical stance that Putin has taken, that Alexander Dugin has perhaps been an influence on. And it's certainly been an undercurrent, that has, and perhaps even a source of extreme conflict within the occult world for the last 4 or 5 years of the kind of sudden re-emerging of the traditionalist school. And I'll point out, I mean, you take pains even right at the beginning of the book to distance yourself from, for instance, Evola and things like this. So but maybe just touch on that, because I mean, this is a book that can certainly be seen to some extent as at least in reference to that trend within a culture, but is also saying something individual. And maybe if you want to touch on that from a more I mean, this is, for instance, I talked to Gary Lockman about this when his book came out. And I think this current has perhaps gone away completely post-Trump presidency. Well, is dormant for now, post-Trump presidency and post-COVID, because people have just been dealing with the reality of a very different situation. But we can't. I think we can't gloss over the sudden impact of the whatever that was, the reemergence of that into the occult world or the counterculture world, whatever you want to call it.
Well, I definitely think it's going to continue, and we'll see more of it. And even I don't know the individual's name, but the shaman at the sort of Trump rally where they
the QAnon shaman,
right?
I'm not sure what he represents, but
Yeah. So, but yeah, I'm sure that this mixing of traditionalism and the occult will continue. And yeah, I mean, I I think from reading my book, it's pretty clear. I don't like saying I'm distancing myself because it sounds a little bit fakey, but I think if you read, understand my philosophy, what I'm saying is you don't want to get to either of these extremes. And that's why you want to develop, as we were saying in the beginning, develop this dual nature within yourself so you can resist these sort of up and down of society is going back and forth into some weird modernity or back into some weird simulacra of the past as well. And with Roger Scruton, this idea that we can build cities like Roman cities is completely ridiculous. And we can use that as a metaphor for
Is that
religion.
what
We
he is that
cannot
what
go
sees
back.
is that what he said, or is that your response to him? That it would be
Well,
ridiculous to do that?
he thinks it will be good. It seems. I
Right.
think it will
Okay.
be crazy.
Okay.
With
Okay.
8 billion people on the planet, we'd need 5 planets for those sort of buildings. It's just and we should be looking ahead in terms of architecture to buildings that you see in Mexico City and in China, where they're incorporating nature into the structures of buildings. That is a way forward, and that's both in a sense very traditional, or maybe we could say archaic or archetypal, and yet modern at the same time. So that's great. But I don't this trying to readopt some kind of ancient practice wholesale is never going to work. This rejection of everything in modernity, the rejection of creativity itself and innovation. We need innovation and we need creativity. But the way to really be creative and authentically innovative is generally, well, and I would say always, is to go through some kind of, and I know tradition is a tricky word, but tradition, let's say martial arts. You study martial arts until you go beyond the martial art you've practiced, or you study fine art painting, but eventually you go beyond the teachings and you develop your own style. So that's the idea that we need some kind of tradition because we need a starting point, and you need the good things in the tradition there's no point in reinventing the wheel. We have to, if you want to make a car, you have to begin with what's there. But at the same time, a tradition is also something to hit against. It's something to go against. And one of the things with getting rid of all tradition is not just that it will get rid of restrictions. It will actually restrict us more in some ways because there'll be nothing to sort of hit against. So we end up creating things that are meaningless. We want to create things that are meaningful. And so you need to go through some kind of tradition, martial arts, fine art, music, philosophy, spirituality, esotericism, whatever it is. And then when you come out the other side, contemplated it for a certain number of years, then you will start to create things that are original, yet at the same time, if you've really understood what it is about, it will reflect something archetypal, eternal. Again, as Khalil Gibran says, if what I've said is true, someone will come again and say it in other words. And that's really what we're aiming for, or what I'm aiming for. This whole book is a transcendent experience going through life, its difficulties, merging the warrior and the mystic to create something that is both archetypal and innovative and right for the future, to create a better self and hopefully leave something positive for other people as well, but definitely not this wholesale adopting of either of the latest fashion, which is going to be dead in 5 years from now, or some simulacra of the past. You need to constantly balance the tradition and innovation and creativity and move beyond your own limits and the limits of tradition. So that's what I would say in a nutshell.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think that in my own path through whatever you want to call it, the initiation of life or whatever, it often seemed as if I was forced to recapitulate prior periods. So it was almost like I had my hippie phase where where I was like just
Yeah.
wanted, my
Yeah, me
acid and
too.
mushrooms phase where I just wanted to, where it's all of a sudden that
Yeah.
stuff really made sense to me. And it's just like, oh, this is like,
Mm,
okay, I get it. I get what this was about. And then I had,
hmm
kind of my 80s corporate,
hmm
self-obsessed greed phase, and it's like, and but it was almost like, like I had to recapitulate at least, I wouldn't
hmm
say all history, absolutely, would be impossible, but at least the lived experience of those who were currently alive on the planet, right? So
Yeah.
going back
Yeah.
to, certainly the 40s and the 30s and things like that, so that I had to go through those
hmm
periods and
Mm,
get the gnosis, if you will, or
yeah.
understand what that was by recapitulating it.
Right.
And it was only by doing that
Yeah.
I was able to, I guess, feel, I guess, at least within myself, feel that I could have a dialogue with culture, right? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd done my research.
Right. Exactly. And presumably gone beyond what you were practicing earlier on as well. So,
Always, yeah. I mean, we're
yeah.
always pushed, I think, even if we don't want to be
Yeah.
pushed, to go to
Yeah.
the next, whatever the next thing is.
Some of us, yeah, and that's fortunate, even though it feels unfortunate at the time often. But you
It
mentioned
always
the
feels
word gnosis.
unfortunate.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, you mentioned the word gnosis, which is a very IoT chaos magic word,
Yes.
but also a word that you find in relation to Islamic mysticism as well, Arfan, translated as gnosis. And
I mean it in that sense, in the sense of transcendent knowing, rather than,
yeah,
I got
exactly. Yeah.
I got +5 high and focused on a sigil.
Yeah, but I would say that ultimately that's what my book is about. It is about the journey towards gnosis. So it's definitely not shilling for one side or another or making any kind of innuendo that one might be better. It's purely about the individual achieving gnosis through this process of life and going through difficulties and inner struggles and experiencing, in a sense, a kind of mystical revelation at the end of that. But yeah.
Well, maybe we should end on. I'm curious, perhaps, if you want to give particularly to younger people. Let's
Mm.
say guys in their late teens, or even even particularly mid 20s. I think is when
Yeah.
men can often feel very lost and
hmm
that or jilted. I mean, I think there's a couple periods in life.
hmm
One is probably mid 20s, and then
Yeah. Yeah.
around 40, where it's like, wow, the dream is over. And suddenly all of our plans for life are um seem as if they were perhaps an illusion, and we were forced to
mm
deal with. And certainly the Saturn return period and things like that. But let's say
hmm
particularly for guys in their mid 20s who may feel a bit lost and lacking in power, without power
mm
in a in a fairly dead and malevolent society. I mean,
Yeah.
other than handing them this book, I mean, what would you perhaps say to
mm
them?
Yeah. Well, I would say two things, I think. I'd probably say more than that, but in the interest of time, I would say, first of all, embrace your
Well,
struggles.
take your time. This is the internet. You have as much time as you want.
Oh.
This is the last question, but go as long as you want.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, so I would say embrace your struggles. Don't feel bad about it. Things that happened to you in the past. You don't want to identify with those struggles and say, oh, woe is me. But you do want to realize that's going to be the catalyst to becoming much greater than you would have been. So you want to, if you're having a tough time or you've had negative experiences in your life, that's what's going to make you in the end. So you want to uh, contemplate that and figure out how, in a sense, and pursue what's difficult, pursue what is a struggle. And the other thing I would say is develop yourself as a whole. So, read books by intelligent authors, read classical philosophy, read ancient philosophy, but, develop your physical body. You don't have to be Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime, but you should be able to look in the mirror and see some muscle. One of the weird things that we as men experience is that we don't really know, especially today, but we don't really know when we've become men. Maybe a century ago there was still some, at least pretty corrupt but at least some semblance of an initiation into manhood. Your dad would take you for your first pint of beer or whatever, or whatever it was, or you would be in a war probably, but World War One or two, but no fun. But today we don't know when we become men. Women know they menstruate. Women menstruate together. They menstruate in time with the moon, and so they're linked in with other women and with nature, which is a wonderful thing, absolutely. But men don't have that. So we have to develop our own bodies and be able to look and say, yeah, that is the body of a man. That is an initiatic and experience in itself. It's part of, see this Shaolin monks have very muscular bodies, or Bruce Lee, or the warrior in general. That's an initiatic experience, and that's kind of a ground level for it. But again, develop your mind, your intellect, develop a spiritual practice as well, meditation, try and develop different states of consciousness. Rational thinking is not enough. That's why in martial arts, in art, you're entering these other states of consciousness, what's often called flow today. So our mind is much more expansive than we're told it is today. Ayn Rand with this idea that we are sort of rational producers. Well, we're much, much more than that. And we're constantly in and out of these different states of consciousness. So develop your body, develop your intellect, develop the mind as a whole, develop a spiritual practice, and develop a creative practice as well, whether that's a business or painting or calligraphy or poetry. Develop yourself as a whole. Everybody else is going to want to make you a cliche and tell you what you are and what your limits are. But you are unlimited. You should develop yourself as a whole. This duality that will enable you to go beyond what is expected of you, beyond where people tell you you can't advance beyond. And that would be really my main advice to young men.
Well, I couldn't agree more. So where can the book is out now, right?
It's out November 9th.
It's November 9th.
Sure when
okay.
You're putting this out. Yeah.
I was going to put it out pretty quick, but can you pre-order it on Amazon?
You can pre-order on Amazon.
Excellent.
And probably some other places as well. Certainly on Amazon, you can probably pre-order it in Barnes & Noble as well.
And then IndieBound, I think Inner Traditions usually sells on IndieBound.
I know they will have it. Yeah, I don't know if you can pre-order them there, but they will have it on Amazon.com and Amazon.co.uk. You can pre-order.
And then where can people find out more about you and your work?
They can go to my website, angelmillar.com, and it's ANGELMILLAR.com. And you can find out about my writing, books, hypnosis, states of consciousness, and all other good things like that.
Well, sounds wonderful. Well, it was a treat having you on the podcast. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed it.